ask that in part because increasingly folks are looking at some of the big tech companies too, right? And whether they start to get more involved in the content game as well as they launch their own streaming services. But they're also undergoing these antitrust investigations, and they're under scrutiny for some of their M&A practices as well. So I just wonder what's kind of still left out there to potentially combine, especially vertically.
Well, my sense right now is the bloom is off that rose a little bit. Yeah. I think people are kind of, it was a rush to do it. I think now people have seen, first of all, there's a huge amount of capital flowing into this business. You've got some big spenders there, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, pouring money into the space. This is now super competitive. I think a lot of people want to sit back and see how does the AT&T Time Warner thing play out. Are there real synergies there? Can they capture some real advantages from that vertical integration? Both to see whether they want to invest, and also it will help inform whether the antitrust regulators are going to be taking a more hawkish view about this. I mean, ironically, the better it is for investors, the more profitable that deal becomes, the more likely there's going to be intervention from Washington.
The biggest victor out of all this is maybe not CBS or Viacom shareholders, but the biggest one, Sherry Redstone, right?
Well, it's certainly something that she was pushing for. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the main obstacle to it was personalities, and they've kind of, and Moonves is gone, she's backing Bacchus, she's got a stable leadership team. We'll see if this kind of duopoly at the top holds up. They often don't, but, we'll see. I think it was a very smart move on her part.
She got it done, right? After, this thing was hanging out there for seemingly forever.
Yeah.
We'll see what it means about pricing. It's going to get awfully crowded in that space.
Yeah, I don't think it's not going to be $6 or $8 a month for much longer.
Jim, have a good weekend. Thanks for coming. Jim Stewart.
We love it while it is. When we come back, is Greenland for sale? President Trump reportedly looking into purchasing the country. We have the details on this next. And let's get a check on the Dow and what has been quite a wild week. We're currently up 218 points. They're still poised to close the week lower. We got more Squawk on the Street after this break.
Driverless cars or trips to Mars.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime. And the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore. And dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view. With Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Keys. Waterfront outlet shopping.
This summer at Chessington World of Adventures Resort. Answer the call of the wild. With over 1,000 of the world's most amazing animals. And over 40 of the wildest rides and attractions. Meet the Gruffalo and all your favourite characters at the Gruffalo Summer Party. And so much more. Book early and save up to 40% at Chessington.com. It's Britain's wildest adventure for all the family.
This is a plug. A plug for the future. Inviting you to join the forward-thinking riders, skaters, and drivers who choose electricity to get around. Charging their bikes, boards, and cars using power from EDF Energy, the UK's largest producer of low-carbon electricity. So, do you like the sound of the electric future? Come and join us. Generation Electric. Everyone's welcome. EDF Energy.
It had been 22 years since Dan and Tom last met, since they shared a desk in maths and played football together at lunchtime. 22 years with nothing more than a few Christmas cards and an online friend request to show for it. A 21st century eulogy for the loss of a once great friendship. Until a chance meeting outside the corner shop. On a morning they both decided to ditch the car and walk instead. Walk, cycle, discover. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Let's send it over to Hong Kong now. Our Brian Sullivan on the ground there following those protests that have been taking place. Brian?
Hey, Scott, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think we might have just missed the moment here. Shame on me. But the crowd dispersing, very peaceful political rally. Everybody's kind of dispersing, but here you go. You talk about U.S. involvement. Can you hear what's playing? They're playing the Star-Spangled Banner and have been on a loop for the last few minutes. Over the loudspeakers, a lot of American flags here, a lot of clapping when the Star-Spangled Banner is over. There's been a lot of pro-U.S. viewpoints, if you will, in part, guys, because they would like President Trump and the U.S. administration to use any political influence, perhaps on Beijing or the Hong Kong government, to achieve their political ends of more independence. But I think it is a striking scene. You have a rally of a couple 10,000 people ending, a lot of American flags, and the way they end it is to play the Star-Spangled Banner. Not sure what that says. We hear a lot of knocks on the United States. But here, a lot of pro-U.S. feelings, and look into Washington to maybe help out their cause here, guys.
Brian, we appreciate that very much. Thank you. That's Brian Sullivan live on the ground for us in Hong Kong. Let's switch gears to our ETF spotlight now. Contessa Brewer taking a look at chip stocks with NVIDIA soaring on its earnings beat. Contessa?
Yeah, back here at the home of the brave, one of the most closely watched ETFs in the semiconductor space, ticker SMH, rallying today on the back of that upbeat earnings from NVIDIA, which reported strong demand for its newer high-end graphics chips made for video games. The sector's move, though, has been relatively muted due to the weak outlook from Applied Materials. That company warning recovery that for the memory chip market would be unlikely to occur before next year. The chip sector has been beaten down this month as growth fears resurface. These trade tensions between the U.S. and China are ever present. The SMH is on pace for its third straight negative week. And among the worst performers in the group, including Skyworks, Intel, Xilinx, Cadence Design Systems, all down more than 6%. NVIDIA still down more than 5% on the month, even with the earnings-fueled surge today. It's worth keeping in mind, hopes of a tariff truce really boosted these stocks during the first few months of 2019. The group is still up 27% year to date, but those gains have started to erode as more of the names face weak outlook for the second half. And with earnings season entering its final laps, investors will look to reports from HP Inc., VMware, and Pure Storage. These are tech firms that rely on the chip companies to get a better sense for whether demand will pick up. I'll send it back to you, Morgan. Keep an eye on that.
Contessa Brewer, thank you. Well, the Wall Street Journal reporting President Trump has expressed interest in trying to purchase Greenland. Officials from both Denmark and its territory already swiftly balking at that notion. But here's why the president raising the idea may not be as crazy as it initially sounds, at least from a U.S. perspective. Greenland is home to the U.S.'s northernmost military base, Thule Air Base. Critical site for missile defense, hosting early detection systems for ballistic missile launches, for example, and also space situational awareness. It's also home to the Defense Department's northernmost deep-water seaport and airfield as well. Greenland needs investment, and Russia, and now increasingly China, have tried to gain a foothold by bankrolling projects there. China was looking to build airports, for example, on the island. Last year, we intervened in that process. For China, it's part of a strategy that was unveiled in 2019 for a, quote, polar Silk Road that encompasses Greenland and Arctic shipping routes in the region, which could also involve access to resources like oil and natural gas. But given its strategic importance to the U.S. and U.S. military dominance, this really speaks to the way that I think this country, longer term, above and beyond all the trade talks, is thinking about the world map as it relates to these so-called near-peer threats, China, Russia, and what the conflicts of the future could look like. Bottom line here, Denmark may be swatting down, and Greenland, any talk about a sale of Greenland. But this really does, I think, put a spotlight on why the territory is so geographically important. As Greenland's foreign minister, guys, said to Reuters, we're open for business, but we're not for sale. Nonetheless, again, I think it just really, you put it in the grand scheme of global dynamics right now, especially where U.S. and China and also U.S. and Russia are concerned, and that kind of gives you a sense of why it would even be getting discussed, and you'd have these kind of reports floating out there.
Yeah, I guess the question is, if it's not for sale, what are our options short of a purchase?
We're going to have to find out. I mean, as I mentioned, we do have this military base there. You know, there have been there has been infrastructure investment. We have looked at those options as well. Is that something that we increase? How does that play out from a geopolitical standpoint? I'm going to dig into that, see what I can unearth.
Fascinating headline yesterday. Took a leg higher here on some comments out of Brian Moynihan regarding recession. Let's get a news update in the meantime from Sue Herrera back at HQ. Hey, Sue.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning, everyone. Here's what's happening at this hour. Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib says she will not visit her relatives in the West Bank after Israel issued her a permit on humanitarian grounds. She cited oppressive conditions meant to humiliate her, and it would break her grandmother's heart, she says, if she went under those terms. 2 abandoned objects that appeared to be pressure cookers prompted an evacuation of a major New York City subway station during the morning commute. The police then determined that they were not explosives. Former NASCAR driver Dale Earnhardt Jr., his wife, daughter, and 2 pilots are okay after a fiery plane crash on late Thursday. They were on a small private plane when it went down in Carter County, Texas. The Earnhardt family was released from a hospital after being checked out. And more than 100 firefighters are battling a wildfire in Colorado. The Deer Creek Canyon Park fire is burning near a populated area of Jefferson County. More than 300 people have been told to evacuate. It has consumed nearly 20 acres, and it is not yet contained. You're up to date. That's the news update this hour, guys. I'll send it back to you, Scott.
All right. Thank you so much, Sue. When we come back, how much should investors be worrying about a global recession? A former IMF chief economist will join us with his thoughts. More Squawk on the Street after this.
ETF Spotlight is sponsored by Invesco QQQ.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike, and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet, and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind, and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Keys. Waterfront outlet shopping.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
At Butlins, there are so many great things to do, with amazing live entertainment day and night for all the family. Book online now. There's so much included in the price.
Take care of your family with a Hotpoint multi-flow built-in oven. You pick the dish, it chooses the temperature and cooking method to get your pizza sizzling, your loaf rising beautifully, and your joints spot on. No more burnt edges and raw middles. Multi-flow technology ensures your food is cooked evenly throughout. Perfect. If only you could control the heat outside the kitchen as easily. Get £50 cash back on all Hotpoint multifunction ovens at Currys PC World. T's and C's apply. Visit website for details. Ends 20th of August.
Welcome back to Squawk on the Street. The debate heating up after this week's inverted yield curve spooked markets. Are we heading for a recession? Former IMF chief economist and former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Raghu Rajan, joins us now. He's also the author of The Third Pillar, How Markets and the State Leave the Community Behind. Thanks for joining us today. I mean, given all of the data that's out there, both in the U.S. and the world, the moves we've seen in markets more broadly, what is your sense about these risks of a potential recession?
Well, I mean, it certainly has gone up over the last few days, but it's a complicated tussle, right? We have 3 games of chicken going on simultaneously. One, of course, between the U.S. administration and the Chinese administration over trade. We also have one between the U.S. administration and the Federal Reserve over Federal Reserve policy. And finally, we have one between the Federal Reserve and the markets about who is going to blink first. So a lot depends on how these play out, because to some extent they are affecting the real economy around the world. They're affecting investor sentiment. They're affecting business sentiment. So far, they haven't had a big effect on consumer sentiment, but that could happen.
In terms of the yield curve, the flattening of the yield curve that we've seen, that brief inversion between 2 and 10 spread here in the U.S., and also, by the way, in the U.K. earlier this week, what does that signal to you?
Well, it's more complicated now because there are forces which are operating on the yield curve which didn't operate in the past. Typically, what used to happen is inversion used to happen when inflation was really high, and there was a feeling to some extent that short-term policy rates needed to be really high to bring down long-term interest rates over time. And so you had a yield curve inverting when there was a feeling that policy rates would tighten. This time it's more about the fact that the long-term may look pretty bad, that interest rates will have to remain low, and to some extent bonds are a hedge in this kind of environment. And some of the flattening of the yield curve is because that's embedding a premium for bonds at this time. So we have to be a little careful, but it does suggest things are a little worse than they were in the past. It doesn't, I think, it's not a surefire signal of recession.
How attuned are you to a change in high yield spreads, which is often, especially this week, a reason for people who doubt a recession to say one's not coming?
Well, I think high yield spreads, again, some of it is influenced by which sectors are part of that high yield. For example, the shale sector has issued a lot of high yield bonds. And of course, with the oil price falling, some of that extraction is not remunerative. So I think it really depends on what's going into that high yield spread. But I would say at this point, the strength of the economy comes from a still strong consumer who's still being held up by strong labor numbers. That could change, but it hasn't changed so far. It is an economy which still seems to be progressing reasonably despite everything that's been thrown against it.
Yeah. Sir, how quickly can we reverse some of the damage that's been done because of the trade war and the tariffs, assuming we do get a deal? I presume that this can't be changed overnight.
Yeah, no, I think some of the sentiment will reverse if we get a quick deal. But a quick deal will not alleviate the longer-term concern that some of the same issues that are the basis of conflict, intellectual property theft, the restrictions on companies investing across borders, those will come back to the table because it's hard to see a comprehensive deal with the kind of monitoring structure which makes both the United States and China feel comfortable. So my sense is anything short-term is going to be a cosmetic deal. We'll take off tariffs in exchange for you buying more of our stuff, but that will not satisfy. The other problem is the longer the conflict between the two countries goes on, the harder it is to do a cosmetic deal because people are not going to be satisfied. You fought so long just for this, and so it's getting more complicated as this drags on. But of course, both the United States and China have an incentive to deal because both economies are being hurt by this impasse.
Yeah, and really to that last point, Raghu, if we do start to see some of these, and we've seen the softer data, Germany GDP this week, for example, some of the numbers coming out of China, if you do see certain regions or certain markets of the world, Europe, Asia, actually tip over into recession, can the U.S. avoid that, and for how long?
I mean, the U.S. is more resilient than many of these economies because it's much more self-contained. But no, we are not an island independent of the rest of the world. And it will affect, if nothing else, through the sentiment channel. If the rest of the world is going down, how long can the U.S. continue chugging along? So I do believe that we are, in the United States, more resilient, but we're not totally immune to what happens outside. I do think the forces from outside will put pressure on both the administration and the Federal Reserve to think about policy going forward.
We've seen more than 6 cuts by central banks this year, plus more, I guess, comments suggesting that we'll continue to see more, and that's really just since December 2018 when the U.S. stopped its own tightening. So I guess relative to the rest of the world, the Fed does essentially have more bullets in the chamber right now. Is that something that should be taken into account when you are looking at the U.S. economy versus everything else?
Well, it certainly has more bullets than Japan or the euro area. But also, we must remember that many of the interest-sensitive segments in the U.S. economy are getting less and less sensitive to interest rate cuts. The auto sector, the housing sector, they have been relatively muted in contributing to U.S. growth over the last few quarters. In fact, the auto sector has probably detracted a little bit. I think going forward, my sense is monetary policy has some bullets left, but they're getting weaker and weaker. The reality is, in the United States, far more needs to be done on enhancing growth in specific areas which are relatively depressed, many of the semi-rural areas, rather than a economy-wide stimulus which lifts all boats. We've had both the tax cuts as well as easy monetary policy, and they don't seem to result in strong, sustained growth. We need to think more about place-based regional policies at this time, rather than a whole new set of stimuli.
Lastly, given the focus on currency right now, this rising risk of a potential currency war, where do you see the dollar going from here?
Well, it's as always complicated, right? If in fact we do get a global recession, the dollar becomes the safe haven, and everybody crowds into the dollar. That strengthens the dollar. Of course, if on the other hand the U.S. sort of plummets for some reason, then and while the rest of the world stays strong, that's unlikely. The dollar goes the other way. The problem with any sort of statements about the exchange rate is markets have thought through all of this, and therefore what is really going to change the dollar is surprises rather than something we all already know.
Raghuram Rajan, thanks for joining us today.
As we go to break, take a look at shares of Deere. Some people finding some value despite the miss and the guide lower. Stocks up almost 4%. The company did say farmers are delaying purchases of ag equipment because of the trade war. This is essentially erasing the losses for the year just barely. Dow's up 262 here. More Squawk on the Street in a moment.
We don't sell annuities.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
This summer at Chessington World of Adventures Resort, answer the call of the wild. With over 1,000 of the world's most amazing animals and over 40 of the wildest rides and attractions. Meet the Gruffalo and all your favourite characters at the Gruffalo Summer Party, and so much more. Book early and save up to 40% at Chessington.com. It's Britain's wildest adventure for all the family.
This is a plug for the future. Inviting you to join the forward-thinking riders, skaters, and drivers who choose electricity to get around. Charging their bikes, boards, and cars using power from EDF Energy, the UK's largest producer of low-carbon electricity. So, do you like the sound of the electric future? Come and join us. Generation Electric. Everyone's welcome. EDF Energy.
As he turned the corner, it hit him. A smell so sweet, orchestral masterpieces could be composed about it. But what could it be? He had to find out. So with his nose leading the way, he wandered towards the paradise. He turned a corner and stopped. What lay before him was the most beautiful sight he could ever have imagined. A new bakery. And to think, he'd never have come across it had he taken the car. Walk, cycle, discover. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
It's seeing some relief, but one technician is warning of more trouble hiding underneath the surface. Find out more on tradingnation.cnbc.com. More Swap on the Street coming up.